It's been a hot minute since the release of the new Incarnon weapon upgrades with Duviri. I'm going to break into that now with the Latron, which, dare I say it, might be one of the most ridiculously effective weapons currently available. So let's look at what it has got, why it's so good, and how you can build it. I'm Nick Engineer, let's solve a practical problem. In case you've forgotten what the Latron is, it's a semi-automatic rifle comparable to Marksman rifles in other games. Its basic form has absolutely nothing special about it. It fires ordinary hit-scan bullets with a puncture focus, and that's really about it. The Wraith and Prime variants have substantially better stats prior to being evolved, but they're still semi-automatic rifles with primarily puncture and no gimmick to speak of. Definitely a weapon worthy of a glow-up. And just on the off chance if you've forgotten how you get the Incarnon Genesis upgrades, those are from the Steel Path version of the circuit. Check out my guide to the circuit for more information on that. So when it comes to the Latron, let's have a look at what evolutions you have access to, starting with Evolution 1, the Incarnon mode. Upon landing a headshot with an evolved Latron, you'll gain 5 charges of Incarnon mode. With 8 headshots, you'll reach your maximum of 40 charges. These headshots are per hit, meaning multi-shot can trigger multiple sets of charges, quickly maxing out the potential. By using your alternate fire button, you'll switch to Incarnon mode, opening up the charges for use while conveniently reloading the normal mode. You can do this switch in either direction, even when it's partially charged. Each charge fires a glowing projectile with some crazy properties. Firstly, it has a direct hit of pure impact damage, rather than the normal puncture focus of Latron. This hit comes with a guaranteed impact proc. Secondly, it bounces, losing a significant chunk of speed in the process. Thirdly, with each bounce, and on timing out, the projectile explodes with a 50-50 split of heat and puncture damage in a radial attack that bypasses terrain. The projectile has a short lifespan, limiting it to around 6 bounces in extremely tight conditions. That's still half a dozen explosions per shot. Finally, for all 3 Latron variants, this is coupled alongside a significant boost to damage, crit chance, crit damage, and status chance, at the expense of slightly lower fire rate. It is genuinely insane how much more power this gives your weapon just by itself. Once you run out of charges, or prematurely discharged Incarnon mode by pressing alternate fire, you are returned to the fully reloaded normal fire. Evolution 2 gives you 2 options. Both of them directly increase the base damage of all attacks on the weapon, both normal and Incarnon modes. This damage bonus differs between the different Latron variants, partially but not entirely making up for the difference in the base stats. The variety between the 2 evolutions then is entirely in the second perk, granting either plus 25% multi-shot per puncture proc to a max of 100% for a few seconds, or plus 30% damage bonus per unique status affecting an enemy on hit. The multi-shot bonus is as clear as it's written. Apply puncture, get more multi-shot. Each stack is independent of the others, meaning if you apply 2 puncture procs, wait 4 seconds, then apply 2 more puncture procs, the multi-shot bonus will be plus 100% for 4 seconds, then drop down to plus 50% for the remaining 4 seconds. Given the puncture focus of the Latron in both firing modes, this is easily achieved with the right modding, especially as more multi-shot means more chances to trigger a status effect. The evolution for a damage bonus per status proc is much less clear. This is for 2 reasons. Firstly, if it acts anything like Galvanized Aptitude, then it will give varying bonuses. The bonus is additive to serration on hit scan damage, which is all shots that instantly hit. Meanwhile, projectiles with a travel time get a multiplicative bonus with serration and similar bonuses, yet radial damage gets no bonus. Yeah, it's quite complicated. The second reason this perk isn't so clear, and also the reason I say if it acts like Galvanized Aptitude, is because at the time of recording, this bonus is completely non-functional. I have submitted a bug report on this, of course. Let's act like it does match Galvanized Aptitude for inconsistent consistency. Let's assume you use this evolution alongside only a Steel Path Arcane for plus 360% damage as well. Each status proc on an enemy would provide you with a 6.5% damage boost on the normal mode, a 30% damage boost on Incarnon mode on direct hit, and a 0% damage boost on the Incarnon mode AoE. For comparison, a plus 100% multi-shot bonus when you're using Galvanized Chamber will give you a 30% boost to both damage output and status output on all of your attacks. Consider that on the Latron Prime, the Incarnon direct hit damage is at most 27.7% of the damage of this mode, and then only if you directly hit one enemy with no others around and no extra bounces. This is the literal worst case scenario for the gun. That scenario would give you a 30% damage bonus per proc to just that fraction of your damage, totaling only 8.3% extra damage per proc on the enemy. This versus an always on damage and proc bonus of 30%, so long as you're still landing puncture procs on any enemies, not necessarily the one you're aiming at. Multi-shot really is the king here, so of the two bonuses to be bugged and non-functional, I'm actually glad it's the damage one. Next, we have the third evolution, which is mostly a set of quality of life features. You can pick from minus 60% recoil, which only affects the normal mode, as Incarnon has no recoil, plus 15 magazine capacity, which again only affects the normal mode, or minus 30% zoom if that's your thing. This isn't a river mod though, so minus zoom won't make the gun stronger. Personally, I've gone for the extra magazine to allow for more spammy shots with the normal mode against harder to hit headshots without needing to reload. That said, it's entirely a preference thing here. The final evolution is where we find some truly incredible spice, pushing the evolved Latron into downright broken tier. You have a choice of removing 20% of enemy armor permanently with each puncture proc, a plus 100% bonus to the headshot damage multiplier, or a glorious bonus to the base critical chance and critical damage. The normal Latron gets a bigger crit boost than the variant, but it still ends up with a lower final value. When I say bonus to the base crits, it's changing the unmodded values of the weapon, allowing it to scale yet higher with mods. So your first choice can make armored enemies fall apart with your bouncing puncher explosions. Not fighting armor? Then you can expand the critical power so highly that Latron Prime and Latron Wraith both reach over 200% critical chance on their Incarnon modes just using critical delay. This is on top of having a 7.92 times critical multiplier with just Vital Sense. Should you find yourself wanting to avoid the Incarnon mode and just go for classic headshots, the critical bonuses more than double the base critical chance of the Latron Prime's normal mode, or you can double the headshot damage directly. Given the scale of the critical bonus, you're probably better off sticking with that instead of the headshot bonus, as it means body shots you land will be stronger, and you can get more reliable damage from hunter munitions should you use it. I don't think I can stress enough though how powerful an AoE, bouncing, armor stripping, heat procking, high crit, high damage weapon like this truly is. In the not so distant past, D nerfed a whole section of AoE weaponry, either taking away their max ammo pickup rate, or both. That was their answer to the growing AoE meta, to keep the weapon's power but restrict how spammable they were. Now granted, many of those weapons can be acquired before doing steel path circuit runs, but still, Latron Incarnon completely ignores that by being able to generate 40 bouncing explosives with extreme effectiveness. Now it's not the weapon to replace all weapons. You do still need to land some headshots to generate Incarnon charge, which can be a pain against some enemies like the Infested. The base radius on the AoE is a modest 4 meters, substantially smaller than weapons like the Tenet Envoy's 8 meters. The armor strip is incredible, but it does require prioritizing the otherwise near useless puncture procs, which are technically inefficient to mod for. Also, the armor strip doesn't work against targets immune to status procs, as well as those immune to armor strips such as Kuva Liches. That is, however, a near enough comprehensive list of the downsides. You need some headshots, and each individual explosion isn't a room-wide nuke. Oh, how will you ever survive? Let's have a look at some builds then. First, the absolute power build, leaning into everything this weapon is capable of. We've got the virtually mandatory mods of Galvanized Chamber, Critical Delay, and Vital Sense for multi-shot and crit stats. Primary Merciless is handling all the pure damage bonuses. Primed Firestorm increases the radius of the Incarnon explosions. We've got Thermite rounds for more status chance and heat damage, Piercing Caliber to equalize the puncture damage for status proc purposes, and Bladed rounds to further enhance the critical damage while aiming. Lastly, Primed Bane of Grineer should of course match whichever faction you are mainly facing in any given mission. This setup will tear through Grineer units with absolute ease. Combine it with the multi-shot and armor strip evolution perks to give an average of 1.23 puncture procs per trigger pull on the normal mode, and 1.03 puncture procs per Incarnon mode explosion. A couple well-placed shots will rapidly remove all the armor from most enemies on top of immolating them. Primed mods can be downgraded to normal versions for a lesser effect of course, and bladed rounds can be swapped out for either hammer shot for a no aim bonus to critical damage and status chance, or for serration for a greater pure damage boost at the cost of lower overall damage. If you're allergic to Bane mods, you can instead slot in either of these replacement mods too. You might be wondering why I've not included Double Tap, the Latron exclusive mod with multiplicative damage scaling. The reason for this is that it only applies to the normal shot, not to the Incarnon mode. The timer on it does pause while in Incarnon mode, but that's no excuse for throwing away a mod slot for the main damage part of your weapon. For that reason, it has no place on this build. Now if you're against enemies that mostly don't have armor to strip, which is basically going to be the corpus because you don't need special modding for the infested, we can swap around a couple mods to a more standard heat viral approach. The 50% armor reduction from heat procs combined with the health damage bonus from viral procs will suffice for the few armored units you'll encounter, and otherwise this will give you plenty of damage to face off against all corpus units. Ones with higher shields may be a pain due to viral procs having no effect there, but this will not be an issue in most missions. Alternatively, you can mod for magnetic heat by swapping out Malignant Force for high voltage. This opens up a build that is more powerful against highly shielded corpus, like the Treasurer, at the expense of being much weaker against more health-based enemies. It's all situational. I've stuck with 3 60/60 mods here instead of the stronger pure elemental mods to both bring up the status chance and to maintain the presence of puncture procs. This keeps the multi-shot perk running and allows you to choose between keeping the armor strip evolution or switching over to the crit evolution. That armor strip can be handy for enemies like corpus demolishers. The last build today is if you just wanted the evolved Latron to be a stronger but otherwise ordinary rifle. You'd be throwing away a lot of power, so I don't recommend it, but you can use this setup here. We've removed Prime Firestorm as the AoE buff doesn't matter if you're playing Marksman, giving us room for Prime Shred for fire rate and punch through buffs. Punch through is useless on the Incarnon mode, which is why we've not used it any sooner. You can swap Prime Shred for a Bane mod if you're not interested in hitting multiple enemies at once with the punch through. Double Tap allows for a multiplicative scaling of your damage, hunting munitions for slash procs to kill almost any unit, and a pair of 60/60 mods to proc viral to enhance that slash damage. To top it off, we've switched over to Primary Deadhead for the easier to maintain damage buff, as well as recoil reduction and headshot bonus. For evolution perks, again, stick with the multi-shot and magazine buffs unless you really need that recoil reduction. And otherwise, switch the final evolution to critical bonus even against armoured units. Hunter munitions will take care of them for you. So whether you're carving through corridors of clones, crushing corpus crewmen, or carefully cutting craniums in half, this should give you what you need to take Latron Incarnon to its disgustingly powerful max. This is a classic endgame weapon, overpowering most enemies with ease. If you found this video helpful, make sure to subscribe and you can catch more live with me over on Twitch. The link is in the video description. That's all from me for now though, so as always, build headshots, bounce bombs, and fight well, Tenno.